Miami. Alright, so look, man, where you from, man?
Right here. Man,
Right.
what's in that mic, man?
Is that what?
What's in that mic, man? That shit smell bad there, man.
This my nephew Mike.
Your nephew mic. Man, shit, god damn. Man, look at man. Man, that shit's killing me.
What you mean? I'm saying you trying to be a part of the interview or what, man?
Yes, I'm trying to be a part of the interview, but that shit.
Alright, so look, Black History Month or Christmas?
Christmas.
Why Christmas?
He keeps saying Christmas. You get gifts. Damn, that shit smell nasty.
You don't like Black History Month?
Yeah, I like that too, but oh lord, man, fuck that, man.
What happened?
Man, that mic stink, man. God damn, who mic this here?
My nephew Mike.
Man, you need to get that mic back to your nephew, man.
So you not trying to be a part?
Compton, these developments would, in time, make St. Lucians masters of their own destiny.
But one thing was missing. To be able to chart out for themselves their own courses of development, the people of this country had to be independent. Up until 1978, St. Lucia could legally control only its internal affairs, while Britain remained responsible for external affairs and defense.
Agriculture and tourism continued to sustain the island's economy, but these economic activities were tied to the external affairs of the island, which Britain controlled. Premier John Compton was determined to give control of St. Lucia to St. Lucians, and in 1978, he led the island on the crusade towards independence.
While the government was preparing the people for their new status, the opposition St. Lucia Labour Party, led by Alan Luisi, held public demonstrations in Vieux-Fort and the city of Castries against the granting of independence to St. Lucia by the British government. Another part of the preparations for independence was several rounds of constitutional talks in London, which were attended by the government, led by Premier John Compton, and the opposition, led by Alan Luisi.
In London, the Minister of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ted Rowlands, welcomed Mr. Compton and Mr. Luisi, George Odlum and Peter Josie. This meeting was held at Marlborough House. The government team also included Parry Husbands, Dr. Claudius Thomas and Henry Girodi. The SLP's team included George Odlum, Evans Cauldron and Peter Josie. The British government's team was led by Ted Rowlands.
And at the end of the talks, Premier Compton expressed the wish that the difference between government and the opposition would be resolved.
We have spent 4 days modeling the new framework within which the people of St. Lucia will soon begin to conduct their own affairs as a free and sovereign people. We have arrived at substantial agreement, and the nature of that new framework and the narrow margins of difference between my delegation and the delegation representing the opposition will, I have no doubt, be readily resolved in the House of Assembly in St. Lucia. Without the goodwill that has prevailed, the success that has attended this conference would not have been possible. We know that, on your part, sir, that goodwill will continue to prevail. And while we aware that the impending recess of your Parliament and the conditions that may obtain after it reconvenes will crucially affect the timing of St. Lucia's transition, we know that you will bend every effort, as you've assured us, to clear the way to permit the people of St. Lucia to enter into sovereign nationhood on their National Day, December 13, 1978.
And Mr. Luisi, for his part, told the conference of his wish for basic protection in a new constitution for the people of St. Lucia.
It is clear that the policy of the British government is to grant independence to associated states as soon as is reasonably practicable. But even in achieving desirable goals, it is vital that the method of achieving these goals are plausible, legitimate, and that guiding principles are adhered to. In the course of the conference, my delegation has insisted on some basic provisions for the protection of the people. Some were accepted, but others were rejected. We will endeavor, however, to draw such provisions to the attention of the people of St. Lucia in the months that lie ahead.
And the British Minister, Ted Rowlands, also gave his views on the outcome of the conference.
The constitution which has emerged is a very good one. As I said at the beginning of the conference, the constitution cannot guarantee democracy. Only the political will of people can ensure that real democracy survives. But the constitution can...
Welcome to JTV. We're headed over to St. Lucia. Big up the St. Lucia Massive.
And a framework for and a buttress of a democratic system. This conference, I think, has ensured that. We devoted considerable time to the chapter on protection for rights and freedoms of the individual. We've also ensured in this constitution the maintenance of the rule of law. I think we also mustn't underestimate the amount of real significant change which has been both proposed and accepted to the original draft constitution from which we started. They are a tribute, in my view, to the very constructive approach of the opposition at this conference and to the spirit of compromise conducted by the Premier and his delegation.
As the talks ended, Mr. Compton, speaking to newsmen, described the talks as successful.
I think it was successful beyond our expectation. In fact, the conference was scheduled to take 5 days because we expected a lot of grim opposition. It lasted only 3 days of working sessions, and the 4th day was taken up for the final report.
As the news of the outcome of the talks reached home, St. Lucians from all walks of life made their way to Heronora International Airport at Beaufort to salute Premier Compton, whom they had dubbed the Father of the Nation. SLP supporters were also at the airport, not to meet their leader, but to register their protest.
And then came December 14th, 1978. The news out of London that day was that the House of Lords had passed the St. Lucia Termination of Association Order, thus paving the way for an independent St. Lucia on February 22nd, 1979. Here is Alva Clark in London with the good news.
The House of Lords approved the draft order of the St. Lucia Termination of Association, and in a short half-hour debate, all the Lords wished St. Lucia well in the independence in February. The order was introduced on behalf of the government by Lord Ronry Roberts, who is the Minister of State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It was welcomed by the Conservative Party, that's the opposition, by Lord Elton, and on behalf of the Liberal Party by Lord McNair. And a number of lords spoke in a debate that only lasted half an hour. It wasn't a debate in that sense.
With just 2 months to go, all systems were working in full swing, transforming the House of Assembly. And the city of Castries took on a new London-like look. Preparations finally at an end, and just 2 more days to go, Premier Compton was on radio and television addressing St. Lucians after the police had used tear gas on striking public servants. Mr. Compton said,
I had not intended to speak to you again until I make my address of acceptance of the new constitution on February the 22nd at the flag-raising ceremony. But certain matters have now come to hand, which I think is important for me to discuss with you and to bring you up to date with the situation. All of us who live in St. Lucia know that for several years now, since we indicated that it was the government's intention to seek independence for St. Lucia, certain elements in our society who've been very vocal have been trying to frustrate or at least to delay St. Lucia's march to freedom. They've tried everything. They've tried delaying tactics and procrastination. They've tried intimidation. They've resorted to violence. And all these things have failed. Our country, like any mother, is going through the pains of birth. But when our labors are over, we all shall rejoice at the birth of our nation. We shall continue steadfastly along the path we have chosen.
Soon after this address, it was over to Fiji Airport to welcome to St. Lucia Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra, Her Majesty the Queen's representative at our independence celebrations. And with just 1 day to go, Premier Compton said that St. Lucia was looking forward to using its independence as a tool for our development.
we're not going to be involved in the politics of the world. I think we're much too small to play any significant role, but we are looking forward to use our independence as a tool for our own economic development, and I believe that is the role that we look for ourselves.
And so, at midnight on February 21st, the British flag was lowered for the last time, and in its place was the flag of a new sovereign state. Thus, after 176 years of uninterrupted British rule, St. Lucians became responsible for their own country and destiny.
On February 22nd, 1979, the island's first Prime Minister, John Compton, took the oath of office, along with Mrs. Geraldine Rock, the First Lady Cabinet Minister, and Mr. Parry Husbands, the first Attorney General to be appointed. Mr. Vincent Flosac was sworn in as the first President of the Senate.
I, Vincent Frederick Flosac, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
With the celebrations of independence now over, St. Lucians began to prepare for general elections. The election of 1979 was held on July 2nd. The elections were presided over by election of 1979 was held on July 2nd. The elections were presided over by protracted labor disputes involving civil servants and teachers. These disputes were seen as politically motivated, and some public servants refused leadership in striking against the government.
By the time voting took place, the contest had shaped up as a two-party battle with no independent candidates involved. For the ruling United Workers' Party, UWP, all incumbents sought re-election except Dr. Vincent Monroe's. As a condition of a new independent St. Lucia, a new voting list was prepared with 67,917 names, a 70% increase over that of 1974. And on that July night, the UWP, after 15 years in office, were voted out in a 12-5 victory for the SLP.
Although the percentage turnout was down from 1974, there was nearly 40% more ballots cast in 1979. Despite the magnitude of the SLP victory, UWP candidates actually polled more than 2,000 votes in excess of the 1974 total. Following the election, Prime Minister Luisi and all of the victorious members of his party traveled to Government House for a swearing-in ceremony. Peter Josie, Winston Snack, Evan Scoldron, Michael Pilgrim, Bruce Williams, John Odlum, Kenneth Foster, Remy Lesmore, Gregor Mason. Not long after this, Mr. Luisi was asking Governor General Sir Alan Lewis to leave Government House, and one-time Secretary of the SLP, Boswell Williams, was appointed Governor General.
The leadership struggle within the government began. This struggle was as a result of an agreement which would install Alan Luisi as Prime Minister with the understanding that he would retire as Prime Minister by a specific date, handing over the office to George Odlum. But when the agreed-upon time for the transfer of power arrived, Luisi hedged, and intra-party battle began. Mr. Luisi resigned, and Mr. Winston Snack, who was a member of Luisi's cabinet and had himself resigned as Attorney General, replaced Luisi as Prime Minister. This move led to the departure of the two Odlums and Mikey Pilgrim from the cabinet. Peter Josie then became Mr. Snack's deputy. This new move did not last, and the Snack-led government collapsed with his resignation in January of 1982.
The Honourable John Compton, the Honourable George Odlum, and I have reached an agreement which is a matter of history, not only for St. Lucia, but I should say for the West Indies. We have agreed to have a national government, a government of national unity, and elections will be held not later than the 31st of July, 1982, this year, that is to say, and I will in the interest of the country, in the interest and benefit of the people of St. Lucia, having regard to the various crises we've been through within the last 2 years, I have decided to step down as Prime Minister, and it is agreed by my colleagues, and we must refer to them now as colleagues because we're working together as one. It is agreed by my colleagues that I will have the right to nominate 4 persons for seats in the cabinet. Mr. Odlum will have the right to nominate 1 person. Mr. Compton will have the right to nominate 3 persons. And Mr. Mikey Pilgrim, who Mr. Odlum has identified as his nominee, will be the Prime Minister.
Mr. Michael Pilgrim, the new interim Prime Minister, headed the interim government, and fresh general elections were held in May of 1982. For the first time, St. Lucia had 3 parties to choose from, each with a full slate of candidates. The result was a resounding victory for the UWP, which won 56% of the votes and 14 seats in the House of Assembly. 2 went to the Labour Party, SLP, and 1 to the PLP. During the elections campaign, Clarence Rombali, who was Speaker in the House of Assembly during the SLP administration, ran on a UWP ticket to beat George Odlum.
The new administration of John Compton, on returning to office, set about consulting St. Lucians on a national plan. But why a national plan?
A nation needs a plan as a ship needs a compass. We want to know where we are at any point in time, where we want to go, and how we shall get there. As a nation, we need to know what we have, what are the tools available for us in the employment for our development. What are our present resources? What are the prospects of supplementing these resources? And how best we shall employ these resources to obtain the maximum benefit, to give our people a better and fuller life. In short, an inventory of our resources tells us where we are at any point in time. Thus, we need to decide, not merely as a government, but as a people, where we want to go, what direction our nation should take to achieve the goals we've set before us, what resources we should employ in every sector of the economy to achieve these goals. For instance, if we want to get to Vierfort, we should decide whether we want to take the road via Soufrière or the road via Dennery. Similarly, if we want to achieve the maximum economic growth, we must first know how much money we have and how much we would allocate, for instance, to agriculture, to education, to tourism, to industry. In this day and age, this age of science and technology, we must decide what direction we should guide our children. Should we develop the field of science and technology, or should we continue, as we've been doing, in arts and general sciences? In agriculture, what are the markets available, and therefore what crops we should produce, and how best we should produce them, and in what area of St. Lucia can these crops be best produced?
St. Kitts and Nevis have one of the longest written histories in the Caribbean, both islands being among Spain's and England's first colonies in the archipelago. Despite being only 2 miles apart and quite diminutive in size, St. Kitts and Nevis were widely recognized as being separate entities with distinct identities until they were forcibly united in the late 19th century. Pre-Columbian period. The first natives to live on the islands, as early as 3,000 years ago, were called Siboney. However, the lack of pottery makes their origin and timeline uncertain. They were followed by the Arawak peoples, or Taino in 800 AD. The warlike island Caribs followed and had expanded north of St. Kitts by the time of the Spanish conquest. Peak native populations occurred between 500 and 600 AD. The first Europeans. The first Europeans to see and name the islands were the Spanish under Christopher Columbus, who sighted the islands on 11 and November 13, 1493 during his second voyage. He named St. Kitts San Jorge and Nevis San Martin. By 1540, Nevis was used by the Spanish, an abbreviation of Santa Maria de las Nieves, a reference to its cloud cover resembling snow. Sir Francis Drake mentions visiting St. Christopher's Island in 1585 during Christmas. The next European encounter occurred in June 1603, when Bartholomew Gilbert gathered lignum vitae on Nevis before stopping at St. Kitts. In 1607, Captain John Smith stopped at Nevis for 5 days on his way to founding the first successful settlement in Virginia. Smith documented the many hot springs in Nevis, whose waters had remarkable curative abilities against skin ailments and bad health. Robert Harcourt stopped at Nevis in 1608. St. Kitts and Nevis, 1623 to 1700. In 1620, Ralph Merrifield and Sir Thomas Warner received from King James I a royal patent to colonize the Leeward Islands, but with overall authority through James Hay, 1st Earl of Carlisle. Merrifield and Warner formed the company Merwar's Hope, which was renamed Society of Adventurers, which merged into the Royal African Company in 1664. Warner arrived on St. Kitts on January 28, 1623 with 15 settlers and came to terms with the Carib chief Ubautu Tegremant. 3 Frenchmen were already on the island, either Huguenot refugees, pirates, or castaways. The hurricane of September 1623 wiped out their tobacco and vegetable crop, yet the colony survived and grew. Hopewell arrived in 1624, and included Warner's friend Colonel John Jefferson, who built Wingfield Manor. This Jefferson may have been an ancestor of Thomas Jefferson's. In 1625, a French captain, Pierre Belain des Nambuc, arrived on St. Kitts aboard his 14-gun brigantine and a crew of 40. He had escaped a 3-hour battle with a 35-gun Spanish warship near the Cayman Islands. In 1627, Warner and des Nambuc split the island in 4 quarters, with the English controlling the middle half and the French the end quarters. Cardinal Richelieu formed the Compagnie de Saint-Christophe in 1626, and 40 slaves were purchased from Senegal. By 1635, the number of slaves on St. Kitts had grown to 500 to 600, and by 1665 the French West India Company replaced the Compagnie. As the European population on St. Kitts continued to increase, Chief Tegremant grew hostile to the foreigners in 1626, and plotted their elimination with the help of other island Caribs. However, a native woman named Barb informed Warner and des Nambuc of the plot and they decided to take action. The Europeans acted by getting the Indians intoxicated at a party before returning to their village, where 120 were killed in their sleep. The following day, at a site now called Bloody Point, with a ravine known as Bloody River, over 2,000 Caribs were massacred. By 1640, the remaining Caribs not enslaved on St. Kitts, Nevis, and Antigua, were removed to Dominica. In 1628, Warner allowed Anthony Hilton to settle Nevis, along with 80 others from St. Kitts. Hilton had recently escaped murder by his indentured servant, and decided to sell his St. Kitts plantation. Hilton's 80 were joined by 100 other settlers, originally bound for Barbuda. The 1629 English colonization was led by George Dunn. Both powers then proceeded to colonize neighboring islands from their bases. The English settled Nevis, Antigua, Montserrat and later Anguilla and Tortola. The French colonized Martinique, the Guadeloupe Archipelago, Saint Martin, Saint Barts, and Saint Croix. St. Kitts and Nevis suffered heavily from a Spanish raid in 1629, led by Frederic de Toledo, 1st Marquis of Villanueva de Valdueza. All settlements were destroyed, 9 hostages taken back to Spain, and 600 men taken to work the mines in Spanish America. 4 ships were supposed to carry the rest back to England, but they returned to the island soon after the Spanish departed. This was the only Spanish attempt to keep the English and French out of the Leeward Islands. During the Battle of the Fig Tree in 1635, the French forcefully removed English settlers who had encroached into the French portion of St. Kitts. The French used 250 armed slaves in the conflict. The island's earliest cash crop was tobacco, along with ginger and indigo dye. However, production from the Caribbean and North American colonies deflated the price, resulting in an 18-month moratorium on St. Kitts tobacco farming in 1639. This prompted the production of sugar from sugar cane on St. Kitts in 1643, and on Nevis in 1648. Windmills were built to crush the canes and extract the juice. The planters grew prosperous and even rich, where Nevis became the richest British colony in the Western Hemisphere by 1652. By 1776, St. Kitts was the richest British colony per capita. Though indentured servants were common amongst the islands, fewer than half survived their servitude, and field work required African slaves. There were twice the number of slaves to Europeans on St. Kitts by the end of the 17th century. In 1675, the population on Nevis was about 8,000, half black. By 1780, the Nevis population had grown to 10,000, 90% black. The slaves had very harsh living and working conditions, only lasting 8 to 12 years in the fields, and by the 18th century, 2/5 died within a year of arrival. About 22% died on the Middle Passage. With the death of des Nambuc in 1635, Philippe de Longuebiers de Poincy became Lieutenant General of the Isles of America and Captain General of St. Christopher on February 20, 1639. The King of France had sold the French portion of the island to the Order of St. John. Dissatisfied with the independence of de Poincy, the King of France sent Noel de Patroclus to Thoisy to replace him. However, de Thoisy was repulsed, captured and sent back to France, along with his allies the Capuchin monks. De Poincy started construction of his Château de la Montagne in 1642, where he resided until his death in 1650. He was succeeded by Governor de Sales. In 1652, Prince Rupert's squadron visited Nevis and exchanged fire with the Pelican Point fort, following the Royalist defeat in the English Civil War. During the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the relationship between the French and English settlers soured, as their home countries warred. On April 21, 1666, French Governor Charles de Sales gathered 800 troops and 150 to 200 slaves at Palmetto Point. As the French advanced towards Sandy Point, where English Governor William Watts waited, the French were ambushed by 400 English troops and de Sales was killed. Claude de Rue de Saint-Laurent took over command as the French counterattacked, forcing the English to retreat. On 22nd of April, during the Battle of Sandy Point, 1,400 English troops under the command of Governor Watts, which included 260 of Colonel Morgan's buccaneers, failed to stop 350 French. Governor Watts was killed, and the English spiked their guns at Fort Charles before fleeing to Old Road Town. Many of the English then fled to Nevis as the French took control of St. Kitts. The French then tried to take Nevis, but were turned back by the English at Piney's Beach. English reinforcements to Nevis failed to arrive when Willoughby's fleet sank in the August 15, 1666 hurricane. Armand d'Angleterre set out from Bastia in April 1667 with Joseph Antoine de la Barre aboard. The French ship encountered HMS Winchester, the start of an English blockade, and engaged in a long-running battle before sinking her and eventually returning to St. Kitts. Finally, the English turned back and attempted invasion of Nevis in May 1667 during the Battle of Nevis. However, the Treaty of Breda restored the status quo. The 1670 Treaty of Madrid meant the recognition of English colonies in the Caribbean by Spain in return for the curtailment of pirate attacks. England established the Admiralty Court in Nevis as a consequence. Those found guilty of piracy were hanged at Gallows Bay. In 1689, during the War of the Grand Alliance, French Governor de Nevis sent troops to plunder the English side, with Irish assistance, while Count de Blanc's fleet arrived in Bastia with 1,200 troops. The French sieged English Governor Thomas Hill's troops at Fort Charles, forcing their surrender on August 15, 1689. The English were once again sent to Nevis while the Irish took over their plantations. On June 24, 1690, Leeward Islands Governor Sir Christopher Codrington and Sir Timothy Thornhill, operating from Nevis, landed an English force of 3,000 men on St. Kitts. Operating from Timothy's Beach and Frigate Bay, they marched into Bastia and then sieged the French at Fort Charles. The French surrendered on 16th of July and were deported to Santo Domingo. The French had used cannon on Brimstone Hill in their 1689 siege, and in 1690 the British began construction on Brimstone Hill Fortress. The Treaty of Rysvik in 1697 restored the status quo. An interesting side note is that Captain William Kidd's privateer Blessed William assisted Codrington during this war. In 1690, a massive earthquake and tsunami destroyed the city of Jamestown, then the capital of Nevis. So much damage was done to it that the city was completely abandoned. It is reputed that the whole city sank into the sea, but since then, the land has moved over at least 100 yards to the west. That means that anything left of Jamestown would now be underground, near where Fort Ashby was built in 1701. The capital was moved south to the town of Charlestown. St. Kitts and Nevis, 1700 to 1883. St. Kitts and Nevis were to face more devastation during the War of the Spanish Succession, though the local impact of that conflict started with the French governor of St. Christopher, Count Jean-Baptiste again, surrendering the island without a fight to Sir Christopher Codrington, governor of the English Leewards, and Colonel Walter Hamilton in 1702. The French inhabitants of St. Kitts were peacefully removed to other islands. The French retaliated in 1705 with a 5-day bombardment of Nevis by Admiral Count Louis-Henri de Chavignac before he proceeded to St. Kitts. There the French pillaged the English quarter after landing on Frigate Bay, carrying off 600 to 700 slaves. Then on Good Friday 1706, the French under the command of Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville attacked Nevis, capturing Fort Charles, then looting and burning Charlestown. Once again, 3,400 slaves were taken, though several more escaped to Maroon Hill and formed a slave army, which effectively resisted a French attack. Before departing Nevis, the French left Nevis in ruins, including its sugar works. The 1707 hurricane did further damage to Nevis. It would be 80 years before sugar production on Nevis reached the level achieved in 1704. The Treaty of Utrecht was signed in 1713, in which the French ceded their portion of St. Kitts to the British. By 1720, the population of St. Kitts exceeded that of Nevis for the first time. In 1724, the population of St. Kitts consisted of 4,000 whites and 11,500 blacks, while Nevis had 1,100 whites and 4,400 blacks. By 1774, The population on St. Kitts was 1,900 white and 23,462 black, while Nevis had 1,000 whites and 10,000 blacks. Upon gaining control of the whole island in 1713, the British soon moved the island's capital to the town of Basseterre in 1727, and St. Kitts quickly took off as a leader in sugar production in the Caribbean. Whilst conditions on St. Kitts improved, Nevis was seeing a decline. The years of monocrop cultivation, as well as heavy amounts of soil erosion due to the high slope grade on the island, caused its sugar production to continuously decrease. Alexander Hamilton, the first United States Secretary of the Treasury, was born in Nevis. He spent his childhood there and on St. Croix, then belonging to Denmark, and now one of the United States Virgin Islands. James Ramsay was ordained a priest at St. John Capistaire Parish in 1762. He continued his abolitionist activities and concern for the welfare of slaves until he left the island in 1781. John Huggins built the first Caribbean resort hotel in 1778. The Bath Hotel was constructed over the site of one of the island's famous hot springs, Bath Spring. The island thus became the first place in the Americas to officially practice tourism. Nevis's popularity as a destination grew, and it continued to be in the favor of the British upper classes, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Lord Nelson, and Prince William Henry, until it closed in the 1870s. The hotel opened briefly from 1910 to the 1930s, after refurbishment by the Gillespie brothers. It housed troops in World War II, and the police department and magistrates' court from 1995 to 1999. By 1776, St. Kitts had become the richest British colony in the Caribbean, per capita. Attacks by the French occurred at the end of throughout the 18th century, including the Siege of Brimstone Hill and the Battle of St. Kitts in 1782. The consolidation of British rule was recognized finally under the Treaty of Versailles in 1783. On March 11, 1787, Captain Nelson was married to Frances Woolward Nisbet, niece of John Herbert, president of the Nevis Council. They were married at Montpelier Plantation, with Prince William Henry acting as best man. In 1799, USS Constellation engaged the French commerce raider L'Insurgent off Nevis during the Quasi-War. The American vessel won a first victory for the United States Navy, bringing the captured French commerce raider back to St. Kitts. In 1804, the French Admiral Edouard Thomas Burgess de Michessy and General Lagrange forced Nevis and St. Kitts to pay ransoms of 4,000 and 18,000 pounds respectively. This was followed by Jérôme Bonaparte's raid in 1806. In 1806, the Leeward Islands Caribbean government was split into two groups, with Antigua, Barbuda, Redonda and Montserrat in one group, and St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands in the other. The islands in the new grouping, however, were able to keep their great degrees of autonomy. The grouping then split entirely in 1816. Lord Combermere bought Russell's Rest Plantation following the defeat of France in the Battle of Waterloo. Combermere Village and School are named after him. The Roman Catholic religion was practiced by the French, and the Church of England by the English, yet a Jewish synagogue existed on Nevis since 1684. The Moravian Church was established on St. Kitts in 1777, and numbered 2,500 by 1790. Bishop Thomas Coke paid his first of 3 visits to Nevis and St. Kitts in 17...
JTV, catch you on the next one.